Let's look at American Samoa, which passed the minimum wage, and the job losses, they reached a 30% unemployment rate, and Congress and the president, it was a bipartisan effort. They suspended the minimum wage increase in American Samoa because of the effect it was having on the economy. That's empirical data from, I think, last year or this year. Okay, so yeah, absolutely look at that microcosm of a small island economy. He also talked about, look at who's paying. Well, Wisconsin Jobs Now, who he works for, got $1.47 million from the Service International Employees Union organization in 2011. It's union funded. I'm here as a volunteer. I only get paid by the sweat of my labor. I have never taken a dime out of politics or for any of the organizing I've done. So absolutely, you should look at who's paying for what. Ask yourself, why are the unions pushing so hard for minimum wage? The overwhelming majority of union members don't earn a minimum wage. I think a strong argument can be made it's because they know that employers will cut minimum wage jobs and hire skilled employees, who most union employees are. They're not altruistic. Unions represent their members. They're not out there doing what they do just because they really want everybody to be better off. They're like any organization. They represent their members. You know, he talked about everyone ought to. Just now, everyone ought to. Everyone should. Well, I think everyone should have a Cadillac Escalade. But I'm not willing to take all of your money so I can buy one for everybody. I mean, everyone should, everyone ought. These are value judgments. Economics is not a value judgment. Economics is a matter of dollars and cents. Either it does or it does not happen if XYZ is done. And so, do I think I don't employ anybody who earns the minimum wage. I've employed college students and high school students who came to me with no prior job experience and who I had to work around their school schedules to make it so they could work. That's why they earned the minimum wage. Unlike my full-time employees who came to me with skills and with the desire to work a full-time job and who I didn't have to work around a school schedule to employ them. Again, it does matter who's paying for it. It does matter the empirical data. And you have to ask yourself, what does living wage mean? Is that not a subjective term?
Hold that microphone because you're about to answer that question.
All right.
And then, Peter, you're going to follow up with it as well. Another minimum wage question. Most of the statistics used reflect the minimum $7.25 an hour worker. Raising the minimum to $10.10 an hour will lift those who make $8 to $9 an hour by a smaller margin than those at minimum wage. How do you justify this as a job killer?
The reason it's a job killer is if you have to pay somebody more for unilaterally. Okay, again, if you'll remember what I said was there are only two values of an hour of someone's labor, what they're willing to sell it for in a free transaction. Okay, so no coercion. There are two values, what someone's willing to sell an hour of their time for and the amount of revenue that hour of time will bring in. Okay, so you can't unilaterally declare that hour of labor is going to bring in a commensurate amount of revenue for the job, for the hour of labor that's done. Okay, so what you're going to do, if your business and your product is price elastic enough, you're going to raise your prices, but in the short term, you're going to get rid of the low-skilled, you're not going to risk your capital on a low-skilled minimum wage employee. You're going to cut that job, and instead you're going to ask the skilled above minimum wage employee to do more, or you're going to find some efficiencies. What we've seen at McDonald's, at Walmart, at other across the board, I think JCPenney's is doing this. The kiosks, where you don't have anybody working and check you out. You think they're doing that because they really love technology? They're doing it because it's cheaper than having a minimum wage employee checking you out. You raise the minimum wage, that makes it even more affordable and even more desirous to put some money into R&D to find ways to get jobs done without having somebody actually sit there doing it. That's how it kills jobs. You can't unilaterally declare the value of one of the major inputs in production. Again, I asked Peter, why 10-10, why not 30? Because whatever the argument is for 10-10 should carry forward to 30. And I've yet to hear any proponent of raising the minimum wage explain that. Again, the other question that has not yet been answered is why do they think that $1 spent by a minimum wage employee is better than the $1 being spent by the person who would otherwise spend it? Again, this is not an if or. Who in the audience has a retirement account? Anybody? Do you think you have mutual funds in it? McDonald's is not owned by some individual who's going, whoa, McDonald's is owned by literally hundreds, tens and hundreds of thousands of individuals who are counting on the profits from McDonald's to pay for their retirement. So it's important to remember that. It's not like either the dollar gets spent by the minimum wage employee or it gets shoved in a mattress. Those dollars are already in the economy doing good.
There is provision in the state constitution that states that the minimum wage shall be no less what is considered a livable wage. How does the state of Wisconsin ignore a provision in the state constitution that addresses this very question?
Well, to be honest, I haven't seen that provision of the state constitution. I know what he's talking about. Again, we're back to the question of define a livable wage then. How about we have the assembly pass the livable wage, define a livable wage as $4 an hour. So great, we're in compliance already. But two, minimum wage, I think that's hard to, it's hard for me to believe because he mentioned it was 110 years ago. The first minimum wage law was passed by Massachusetts in 1912. And between 1923 and 1936, the Supreme Court 4 times in succession found minimum wage laws to be unconstitutional, under Article 5, or under the Fifth Amendment. Then in 1937, I think it was, they ruled in a 5-4 decision that it was constitutional. President Roosevelt pushed for the law, Fair Labor Standards Act, I think, that allowed for a federal minimum wage. And then the following year, there was a 9-0 decision that minimum wage laws, as written, or as written at the time, were constitutional. And in the decision, they said, and basically, no more. We're never going to argue about it again. So my point there is only that for the first 40 years of minimum wage, for the first 30 years of minimum wage, the Supreme Court 4 times in succession, not unanimously or split decisions, but voted that it was unconstitutional, and then they changed their mind, and we've had it ever since. But again, if it is in fact in the state constitution, and again, that which can be asserted without proof can be denied without proof. But if that language is actually in there, then the question becomes define a livable wage. My suspicion is that what happened is after the Supreme Court shot down our first minimum wage law, Wisconsin's first minimum wage law, we went back and we passed a minimum wage law that didn't have an amount. It just basically said you've got to pay a certain wage, and I think it may have used the word living wage. I'm not sure, but perhaps that's what he's referring to. I'm not sure, but again, non-specifics define a living wage. That's the problem. I think that it's really an interesting question. How much is enough? What we just heard was that MIT apparently found that it should be between $18 and $25 an hour. Now, setting aside that that's a $7 swing, that's like 30% of the original 18. So according to the law that we just heard, administrative law, if I understood you correctly, our law should be between $18 and $25 an hour if we let MIT determine what a living wage is. No, we don't want to do that. We want 1010, but we don't really want 1010. We think 1147, which seemed odd. 1147 should be the minimum wage. But what we previously heard is the reason it shouldn't be 30 is because the economics fall apart at 30. But we haven't quite heard why the economics don't fall apart at 1010. But we've also heard that it really should be 18 to 25. Really, the only people who get to determine the value of an hour of their time is the person selling it and the person buying it. That's the fundamental core of economic thought. No one else gets to use in a free society. Now, in coercion, you want to use coercion, then you got to sell your labor for whatever you want. They've tried that in parts of the world through all of human history. It hasn't worked out great. In a free society, you get to determine how much you're willing to sell your time for, and I get to determine how much I'm willing to pay for it. We don't need the government in between the two of us deciding what the value of that is. And if you're willing to sell it for $5 an hour for whatever reason, why shouldn't you get to? And if I'm willing to buy it for $5 an hour, why shouldn't I get to? That's the fundamental question. And again, we haven't heard the answer. We heard it shouldn't be 30 because the economics fall apart. But we didn't hear it. Where do they fall apart? Do they fall apart at 15 or 17 or 19 or 22? It just doesn't work that way. An arbitrarily set price by 122 people in Madison or 535 people in Washington, D.C., it just doesn't work. let the people decide the value of their time. It's their time. As I said at the beginning, I'm an Austrian economist. There are two kind of core economic schools of thought, Keynesian and Austrian. Keynesian is by far and large the prevalent one in our society. Kind of in a real small nutshell, Keynesians believe that when the market place has a retraction, it needs to be corrected by government. Austrians believe that the business cycle, there will be contractions, and the best thing to do is to let it happen as quickly as possible, and it will then go into a growth period. What that really means is it's the difference between, do you think that government, that a really small cadre of people should be making decisions for an economy of millions, or should those millions of people themselves be making their decisions? I mean, that's really the kind of fundamental difference. And the three questions remain. I really haven't heard them answered tonight. Why 10-10? Why not 30? I mean, it really hasn't been answered. Why is labor the one input of production that government should control? Why not all other inputs of production? I mean, that's what socialism is. Control of the methods of production. That's the definition of it. Not ownership. Ownership is communism. Socialism is the control of the methods of production by government. And then why does anyone who is a proponent of raising the minimum wage believe that the additional monies earned by a minimum wage employee, are better spent into the economy than that person paying them? Because again, this money is not shoved in a mattress. It's not sitting in somebody's piggy bank. This money is already at work in the economy. And what we're talking about is arbitrarily taking that money from where it's working and giving it to minimum wage employees. And the theory is that when they go buy Big Macs and buy stuff from Walmart, that somehow the economy will be better off than what that dollar was already doing before it was taken and then given. So those are three questions that I believe still remain.
All right.